I've met her.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. As Representative Peggy's saying hi to all of you, I'm grateful that you would all come out on kind of a blustery Sunday. And I think we were talking on the way down. I think it's appropriate when you gather like this, because I think most of us are watching the news come out of Texas again. And unfortunately, we turn on our TVs about once a week now, and we see these types of tragedies in our country that I think all of us, regardless of where our politics lie, is it's unacceptable. We have to figure out, and doing the same thing over and over and over again, the only thing I can guarantee you on that is that it'll be, you'll get the same result. We won't fix it. And I think people have tried for years to try and understand what is it culturally, what is it in terms of violence, what is it in terms of guns and guns policy, and all of those things that, that's why we gather in politics, to try and improve our communities. That's why we get engaged in this. The elections those are a means to an end. The end is a better policy, a better world, solving problems and moving us forward. So when we were talking about this, the appropriateness of gathering together in a political campaign hours after a tragedy strikes, I would say, and Peggy and I were talking, these are the times that we most need to talk about it. These are the times that what do we want our country to look like? These are the times that can we find commonalities. So I'm grateful that you've come. And I want to make sure there's a few people here, and I want to have you hear from somebody who I have found to be just a great leader, spectacular, thoughtful, compassionate, and someone I'm proud as part of this team. Kind of an unorthodox move that we're running on a ticket very early, Peggy Flanagan and myself, but you're going to get a chance to see why I think it's the right thing for Minnesota. But before I do that, two of my dearest friends in the world are here, and I kind of feel like this space, for some of you, and I know there's folks from all over the country here, and we've got a lot of younger folks, but Northfield, Minnesota is a special place for many reasons. It's very special for DFL candidates, if you will, who run for office, because a lot of really good things and a lot of really progressive ideas have come out of Northfield and leadership. And I'm going to introduce him in just a minute, but one of those folks, and I'm proud to say has been a friend of mine for quite some time, is former Senator Kevin Dahl, who is, we share a lot. We're teachers, coaches, we get young kids playing sports still, and a passion for improving our community. So Kevin, thank you, one in that long line of tradition of really solid legislators. And I'll be very honest with you, there were many reasons for me to be, like many of us last November, almost a year ago to the day when the election came down. But I've got to be honest with you, watching what was happening in the presidential and seeing some of the other things, it was three of my dearest friends in Matt Smith, Kevin Dahl, and Vicki Jensen in Southern Minnesota, who I consider to be some of the most thoughtful, most bipartisan, most effective folks. The elections that night, as for many of us, were not turning out the way we wanted. But I'm grateful, Kevin, for your service. It means a lot to me. And then for some of you, you may not know, Leah and Dave Wellstone are here with us today. Dave is the son of former Senator, late Senator Wellstone, who has become a dear friend of mine, a brother to me, someone who grew up on the politics in and around this campus and this community, and is joining us today as we talk about what do we want to see going forward. So I recognize today it's a little somber again. Feels a little somber in America quite often recently, and I for those of you who don't know, I'm a teacher from Mankato. I taught high school geography, started my teaching career in Pine Ridge, South Dakota, taught fourth grade at Wolf Creek, and then was part of the first group of American high school teachers to teach in China. in the late 1980s. I taught American history in Fusan and Guangdong in the late 80s and spent some time there traveling. Spent a career in the military, Army and Army National Guard, retired when I ran for Congress. Have the privilege of representing the 1st District of Minnesota, which we prayed and hoped could come up into Northfield during the 2010 census. And the only other person that was hoping as much as I was John Klein. Was hoping. He and I would say, Tim, he would say to me, he goes, we have common ground. I just want Northfield to move into the 1st. So, and one of the reasons is there's a long tradition of activism here, and it's more so than just a voting block. It's the thought that comes out of this. So the district spans southern Minnesota. I've had that privilege of being, this is my 6th term. I've served over the years on the Agricultural Committee, written 2 farm bills. We're in the middle of another one right now. Served on the Transportation Committee, served on the Armed Services Committee, and I'm the Democrats' ranking member on the House Veterans Affairs Committee, which I want to talk a few of you on as we approach Veterans Day, probably appropriate on some of that. I also serve on the China Commission, the Congressional Executive Commission on China. It was enacted after normalization with China on trade, and we removed most favored nation status from our trade with China. We used to, before we did trade deals with other countries, imagine this novel idea. We actually required other countries to meet worker and environmental standards that before we would trade with them, to try and use the leverage of the United States economic power to improve the lives of workers and improve the lives of, or improve the environment. We removed that. And the trade-off is that we created an executive commission of 9 members of the Senate, 9 members of the House, who would be watchdogs and be the repositors of Chinese human rights record. And I could tell you a story about that because it was a very interesting dialogue. We went in the first group in 10 years, went to Tibet. When I was a young man, I was in Tibet. I went back to Tibet with members of Congress, including Nancy Pelosi. We met with Chinese leadership in the Forbidden City, and we were talking about what was happening to the Tibetans and to the Uyghurs with the eradication of Tibetan culture in Lhasa. And the Premier Lee comes back at me and says, well, Mr. Walz, I was very impressed by this. First of all, I said, I've been to Tibet before. I think it was in 1989. And he said, no, it was in February of 90. And I said, pretty good, pre-computers. They knew when I was there. But I said, I'm back again. And I said, I understand that, living standards have increased and all of this. But I said, I'm deeply concerned. You don't teach the Tibetan language as much. We're starting to see the culture be spread out. We're starting to see repression of religious beliefs. And he stopped me in mid-sentence and he said, did I get your history right, Mr. Walz? He said, did you teach in Pine Ridge? I said, yeah. And he said, how did your interactions with your native populations work out? And it was really, and I said, but I'm not here to criticize. I said, I'm here to try and learn from each other and learn from the mistakes. So that's where I come from. Peggy and I are running for governor and lieutenant governor of Minnesota because we love this state. That's the first part. We believe that the people who are most impacted by the decisions in government should be the ones at the table making those decisions. We believe that investing in our most precious resource, in our citizens, not only is morally and ethically the right thing to do, it builds an economy that works for everyone. It builds an economy that ensures Minnesota continues to lead. We believe that this is a state that has already done so and can continue to lead to move us in a clean energy economy. Once again, because of the existential threat of climate change, we need to remove it. We need to start reducing carbon emissions. But at the same time, we're creating good paying jobs. We're creating an innovation economy in Minnesota that could be second to none. Those are opportunities to set in front of us. And I believe right now the only thing that holds us back is a divided politic that you watch every day. It encourages me to see on a day like this, after a tragedy strikes in America again, that you would come to an event like this on your free time on a Sunday afternoon to talk about how we can make it better. Peggy and I know this isn't our campaign. This is Minnesota's campaign. This idea, and I will tell you, I will fight this to the very end of the world. And I can tell you there's folks that are very disappointed that we're making inroads in this. This division between an urban Minnesota and a greater Minnesota, this idea that somehow one person gets something someone else loses, this idea of a zero-sum proposition in everything we do in state politics is ripping us apart. It's ripping us apart culturally, it's ripping us apart economically, and it's holding back. And the folks who trade in this type of division, it's exactly what they want to do. There is healthy differences in political opinion. There is not healthy differences in pitting one group of people against another in false choices. The reason that we don't have our roads and bridges being up to where we know they should be in southern Minnesota is not because we're building smart transit projects in Minneapolis. It's because we don't have the courage of some of the folks in the legislature, unlike our legislature and what Senator Dahl was doing, to invest in those things. So this is our opportunity to say it can be different. We can invest and we can have people make those decisions. We can make smart investments and we can go to folks to say, your false choices about it's this side or that, it's the guy in the white hat or the guy in the black hat, those are all false and they hold us back. So I'm glad you're here today. We want to be able to talk about a little bit about our campaign. But before I do that, I want to introduce, I think many of you are probably here to see her anyway, introduce my friend. I'm like, I told some of you here, I should write a paper on this because I'm convinced this is true. So this morning I went out to do my run, and I was going to go out and run. I was already had my stuff on. I ran out to the end of my driveway, and then I ran over and got in my car and drove to the Y because it was too cold out. I did that, and then I ran on the treadmill while I had on the New York City Marathon. Watching that great city a week after an unspeakable tragedy run that marathon, and watching another Flanagan be the first American woman in 40 years to win the New York City Marathon this morning. There's a spirit there, and I said, you can say what you want about marathons or sport or whatever. There's a resiliency that goes to it. So this state rep and my friend Peggy Flanagan is someone that I can't tell you how proud I am to introduce to you. Peggy is a former school board member in Minneapolis. She ran the Children's Defense Fund in Minnesota. She is an activist who has trained literally thousands of citizens on how to engage in their communities, how to make a difference, how to run campaigns, how to get on school boards, or in my case, how to get into the United States Congress with absolutely no background of political history, no money, and no experience. When I went to something that Dave and folks close to Senator Wellstone formed Camp Wellstone, away from many of us who said, I just want to get engaged and I don't know how to get engaged in the process. So they created Camp Wellstone. And they brought together really smart, progressive people to help train others to do this. And so I said, in 2000 and after the 2004 election, I said, I got to do something about this. I've got to get involved. And so someone said, you should run for Congress. My wife said, maybe you should have just written a letter to the editor. A lot less in that. But I said, I got to do something about it. And I did not know it at the time. There'd only been one other Democrat in 125 years win in southern Minnesota. But I went to Camp Wellstone and was trained by people, and I didn't know how politics or how people give a political speech, but there were great trainers there who said, speak from your heart, speak to the things that matter to people. Speak about, and when we ran the idea that healthcare is a basic human right, and I'm proud that we were able to move that forward and add people onto healthcare, but that journey is still going. Or I remember in 2005, I got asked, and there was somebody thought they had a gotcha camera sitting right in front of me. And they asked me, what do you think about marriage? And I said, I think it's the most wonderful thing that's ever happened to me, and I would not deny it to anyone. And then they went out and edited that clip and said, Tim Walz is for gay marriage. And I said, yes, I am for gay marriage. And I won the election. Not in spite of being for that, but because I was for that. And the woman's right to make their own health decisions is not only morally the right thing to do, it's the best thing to do. Those are things that we could do and that we can run on. But there was someone there that told me how you talk about these things. How do you do that? And my trainer was Peggy Flanagan. And I sort of went home and I told my wife, she said, well, what did you learn at Camp Wilson? I said, learned all kinds of things. And I said, there was this incredible trainer there. She was smart and she was compassionate. She knew the politics, but more than anything else, she said, politics is about improving people's lives. It wasn't just a slogan that Senator Wellstone used to say. It was a way of life. It was about believing that your neighbor holds value and that each human being has a value that can add to this community. And so when we started talking about this, and I believe that this race for Minnesota's governor is going to shape our state for the next 50 years. It will certainly shape how we draw our congressional lines. It will certainly shape how we deal with health care. It will certainly shape how do we respond when we have a government in place that doesn't believe in climate change, that doesn't believe in science. And last week unveiled a package of tax cuts that figured the very 0.2% are going to receive the bulk of those tax cuts. At the same time, they're going to ask teachers who used to get a tax deduction of about $30 for writing off $250 that they spend in their classroom, they're taking that away. And when students, and we said it would be best to invest in students and not have them in debt, now they're going to take away the ability to deduct the interest on your student loans, just so we can give it there. Budgets are not just numbers. They're a reflection of our values. They do not reflect the values. The state of Minnesota's values are with its people. The state of Minnesota's values are progressive ideas of reducing carbon emissions and getting a green energy economy, making sure every child starts kindergarten ready to learn and ready to go, making sure that when we talk about opportunity gaps that exist in our community, those are opportunity gaps that we all own, and for the great things Minnesota can do, we can do better there. Somebody taught me how to talk about that. Somebody lived their life by that, and I'm proud to be able to say, when we win this election, and this is a fact that I think a lot of people of all the amazing things that Peggy does. Peggy Flanagan is the first woman of color on a statewide ticket in Minnesota. And when we win this election, Peggy Flanagan will be the highest elected Native American woman in the history of the United States. That's what Minnesota does. That's how Minnesota leads forward. So with that, Peggy Flanagan.
How's it going? That guy, huh? So I'm Peggy Flanagan. I'm really excited to be here with all of you today. I'm a legislator. Currently, I serve in the House and I represent District 46A. And for those of you who may not have memorized off the top of your head where all of the districts are throughout the state, that's St. Louis Park, Golden Valley, Plymouth, and Medicine Lake. And I have the great opportunity to represent the community that raised me. So my mom moved us to St. Louis Park when I was just a baby, and she used a Section 8 housing voucher to get our apartment in St. Louis Park. And she moved us there because she knew that in that community I would have access to really good schools, stable neighborhoods, and an opportunity to thrive. I think I turned out okay. And so my mom was smart in moving us to that community. But the real story there is that we needed a little help. You know, we had access to the Section 8 vouchers. My mom used the Child Care Assistance Program. We had food stamps, and we are an MFIP. And those programs invested in my family. So a lot of times, I know Kevin remembers this as well, we hear a lot of conversation at the Capitol about those people who are on assistance, those people who are taking handouts. And here's the deal, I am those people. And when we think about those people, my family was invested in. And now I'm paying that back, and I'm paying that forward. So when I think about the story of Minnesota, it's a story of my family. Of when folks need a little bit of help, we support them, we invest in them, and then we pay it back. And so now I have the great opportunity to do that in the Minnesota House. And on my way, I did a couple of things leading up until that point. As Tim said, I served on the Minneapolis School Board, but I only saw the opportunity for politics to be one of our tools to make social change because I worked for a guy named Paul Wellstone. And my very first campaign was in 2002. I was a senior at the University of Minnesota, and I was literally driving past the Wellstone for Senate campaign office. And I was like, you know what? I like that Paul Wellstone guy. I think I'm gonna stop. And I walked into the office, and like 7 people were like, hey, welcome, come on in. It felt a little bit like Disney World. And this is amazing. And they said, do you want to help us stuff some envelopes? And I was like, would I? And for 2 hours, I stuffed envelopes with complete strangers and had the best time of my life, okay? And I went back almost every day. And so during that transition from college to my first like grown-up job at the Division of Indian Work, I continued to volunteer on the Wellstone for Senate campaign. And it really showed to me just the opportunity that we have when folks see themselves reflected in leadership, when they see their voices heard. And at the table, right, where we were stuffing envelopes, or in the office where we were, cleaning or directing traffic or getting people signed up to go knock on doors, it really looked like Minnesota. So I was raised on the Wellstone for Senate campaign, and that's how I learned how to do politics. And I have to tell you that one of the reasons why I was so excited to join this ticket is because I think that's what Tim and I are also committed to doing. So it's not lost on me that we are at Carleton College with my friend Dave Wellstone. I was able to then go on and work for Wellstone Action for almost a decade, where we ran the Native American Leadership Program and trained thousands of folks across the country in how to run for office, work on campaigns. And it sort of spanned from folks who wanted to run for tribal council, or my friend Kevin Killer, who now sits in the South Dakota Senate, to someone who, a group of young people who said, we want to make sure that we have a recycling program here. And we put together a plan and we trained folks up and got that done. So this is just part of what I think we're supposed to do, right? When people have ideas or they want to change their own communities, that we invest in those folks. We put together a plan and we make it happen. So now that I'm in the legislature, and I got there through an interesting path, I was the executive director of Children's Defense Fund. I got a phone call from a woman named Marian Wright Edelman, who runs the Children's Defense Fund. She said, hey Peggy, this is Marian Wright Edelman. I want to talk to you about running the Children's Defense Fund. And I said, no, really, who is this? And she said, it's Marian Wright Edelman. I was like, oh, okay, hello, Mrs. Edelman. And I remember having a conversation, and Dave, I don't know if you remember this, but I remember having a conversation with you, and he said, I have this opportunity. And you said, are you worried about leaving this organization? And I said, yeah, I am. And you're like, what do you think my dad would want you to do? He said, he would want you to go work at the Children's Defense Fund. And so I went there and was there for 3 years and was a co-chair of the Raise the Wage campaign. And I remember during this time that we had a DFL-controlled House and Senate and governor's office. And it should have been easy to increase the minimum wage, in my never humble opinion about this particular issue. But we had to fight like heck to get this done. And there were a lot of folks who said, asking for $9.50 indexed to inflation is too much. Why don't you just settle for $8 or $8.50 without indexing to inflation? I was like, you know what? The price of milk, it's not going down. The price of bread, it's not going down. The price of housing isn't going down. And so we need to make sure for that 137,000 children and their families that we don't back down from this either. And I remember this one night where my daughter, who was, let's see, how old was she at the time? She was probably a little over a year. I remember going into her room, she was asleep, and watching her sleep. And I thought about how hard it is to be a parent. And I thought about how hard it is to be a parent just every day, but especially when you don't know where your next meal is going to come from, if you can keep a roof over your child's head, and how you're going to keep them safe. So I did what anyone would do when they were scared and frustrated. I called my mom. And, I said, Mom, we're facing this really tough decision. A lot of people are telling us we have to compromise. And she said, Peggy, I wish there would have been a campaign like that around when I was raising you. And she's like, I don't care what you have to do, but you fight like heck, and you make sure that those kiddos and their families have what they need. And that's what we did. And so when I think about what it means to continue this fight, to continue the fight to make sure that families have livable wages, that we have paid family leave, that we're fully funding and forecasting the child care assistance program, that you don't have to take thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in loans to go to college. These are all issues that affect people every single day. And that I know that Tim and I are going to do everything that we can to have conversations with folks across the state to make change. It is an interesting time, and I use that in the Minnesota way, an interesting time to be in the Minnesota legislature right now. And when we see some of the bills that come through to the floor, and we know that right now the governor is the only person who's stopping much of the destruction of our state, that winning this office is more important now than ever before. And when I think about our ticket looks like Minnesota. And that's what makes me so excited, is that people all across the state can see themselves reflected in Tim's leadership and hopefully in my leadership as well. And we are really committed to ensuring, I can't tell you how often folks at the Capitol introduce bills without talking to the people who would be directly affected by them, which sort of blows my mind as someone who's an organizer in her heart and her guts. That's not what we do. We want to make sure that people who are directly affected by these policies are at the table, have a seat at the table, and that we're really listening to folks to come up and get aligned with the best ideas possible, and that's how we commit to govern. So I'm really honored and humbled to be on this ticket, and really honored and humbled to be in this space, and would love to hear a little bit more from all of you. And just Chimigwech, thank you so much for coming and spending a little bit of time with us today.
Yay. Well, I think if some folks have some questions, I want, before we leave today, I don't want to forget about this as we approach Veterans Day, to say a few things, both hopefulness about that. There was a New York Times story here a couple months back that said if you want to know how Congress is supposed to function, look at the VA committee. And I'm very proud of that because I do believe that our government still will function. I do believe there's opportunities to improve people's lives and to compromise to get things done in a positive way. But we're not naive. We know there's challenges. And Peggy and I talked about campaigning with a sense of joy. And I know on a day where we're watching what's happening in the news, it's sometimes hard to find where that's there. But it's got to be hopefulness. Our politics has got to be hopeful. It's got to be joyful. It's got to be about something more than just figuring out ways to divide us. It's got to be something more than name calling. It sure the hell has to be more than tweeting about it. And I say that not even really tongue in cheek, because it is the smallness of all that's happening now. When you're at a point, and especially the students that are in here, the hopefulness and the bigness of what we can do, and so many people are counting on us. So many people in Minnesota, so many people throughout this country, and so many people throughout the world are counting on us. And it starts with these types of decisions, these types of conversations. So I'm not sure if anybody has anything on their minds. We're grateful for here. Those students who are from out of state, we really want to encourage you to get your residency here and vote here. We want you to think about going to the caucuses and being part of this team. We want you to be engaged in this, because both Peggy and I know if the campaigns are able to truly be about grassroots movement, if the campaigns are truly about being hopeful, the chance to govern afterwards increases greatly. The chance of optimism in it increases greatly. And just trying to eke through with commercials and traditional ways of doing things, that's no longer going to work. We need a new politic, as Peggy said, with people at the table who are going to be impacted. So, if you got stuff, and if you want to share those Ritz crackers,
That is genius.
living the dream. Living the dream. So, yes, sir.
Well, I will start my comment off by saying I am from the great state of Minnesota, so I do have my voter
Yay.
registration in order here. One question I have for the both of you is, you're both obviously very familiar with the great progressive Minnesota narrative that we have going, but that's not the case for everyone. That's not the case for a lot of our African American citizens in our state, and it's not the case for a lot of our Native American citizens in the state, as I'm sure you're well aware and well familiar with. What I want to know is, how can we take Minnesota from being one of the most unequal places for African Americans and for Native Americans, a place where Native Americans in northern Minnesota have to worry about pipelines cutting through their territory and ruining their livelihood? How can we both ensure that there's some equality and some support for these people, and also that we can see greater political participation in this room? Not that it's an issue, but it'd be great to see more people of color, more faces of color. But oftentimes the case is they're too focused on surviving and getting by to have the time to come and stay here. And you and I have both had, great opportunities and great access to resources that not everyone in our state who needs it does have access to. So what are the two of you going to do about that for election?
Beautifully said.
So I'm so glad that you asked that question, because too often when we have this conversation about, so when I was a Children's Defense Fund, right, the Annie Casey Foundation, we did the Kids Count data book every year, and a few years ago it was like, oh, congratulations, Minnesota's the best outcomes for children and families in the entire country. And it's like, yay, and no. Because we know that if kids are at Lake Wobegon, right, or kids are at on Lake Street, they have very different outcomes. And we have some of the largest inequities in the entire country. And unless we ensure that we are putting a racial equity lens on every decision that we're making, we're not going to get where we need to be. So one of the first steps that we've been able to take in that, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, we've got our People of Color and Indigenous Caucus within the House and Senate. That was one of the co-founders of this session. And one of the things that we did there is we introduced a whole list of policies that have been created by and for communities of color. And I think that's one of the most important first steps, is that we are determining for ourselves what those best policies are, right? That sometimes, there's this sense that, oh, I know what's best for you. No, I actually think the answers come directly from communities themselves, and I know that that's something that Tim believes as well. When we think about the decision, like the pipeline, I don't know that folks knew what to expect when there were 4 Indigenous women in the House. So when there was a amendment that was introduced on the floor that essentially said the pipeline could move wherever it wanted without any meetings, any consequences, et cetera. That was something that we felt was a little unfair, especially as it went through, as you mentioned, treaty lands or ceded treaty lands. And so within about 24 hours, we had over 250 people who were in the Capitol who were letting folks know how they felt about that. And that is, to me, what is so critical, and I think what this opportunity for this ticket is. It's not just in the House and Senate, but now also in the governor's office. We're going to have a space where people can proactively be at the table when we make decisions, and we can ensure that we're, frankly, co-governing in a way that we just haven't before. So I want to make sure that you see yourself reflected, right, in the way that we're leading, but that we are also being really intentional about making sure that we're not just expecting people to come to us, but that we're going where people feel most comfortable. Listen, the Capitol isn't always the most accessible building, and there is some artwork there where I've been part of interpreting it, right? Where folks can feel a little bit more welcome and through that interpretation, but that part of our job is also making sure that we're meeting people where they feel most comfortable, and I think that you're going to see that. We already have started that work, but I think that you're going to see that over the next several months as we're in community.
And these campaigns are job interviews. We always say this, ridiculously long and expensive job interviews.
Right.
but it is what it's about, and this question is exactly right, in showing how you act and bringing the people in and surrounding. My job, and I think my brand in Congress and what I've done in leadership, is the ability to bring people together, counterintuitive coalitions, get on the front lines of things. If we need to build this pipeline and it meets the safety requirements and it is able to be done without doing the things that weren't thought about on the front line, it just makes more sense to solve those problems in the beginning, to tackle them in the front instead of getting into these situations where they're not productive. So I said, I think this idea of we get a little bit of power and we're going to do it our way if we're 50% plus one or whatever, that's not the way you get things done. That's not how you build strong communities. On this issue of the opportunity gap, and you're absolutely right, of all the great things we do, we're last in where you're talking, we are last. I have to see that opportunity gap with my son, Gus, who's a 5th grader. He has classmates in there who they may fall into that opportunity gap. I have to own that opportunity gap as a Minnesotan. We don't want people to think that's someone else's problem because it's all of our issue. But inside that opportunity gap lays the real opportunities of fixing this and bringing this on and encouraging and moving the state innovatively forward. So watch how we act is what we'd ask, and watch the policies. So yes, ma'am.
Tim, your career, you've done a huge amount of really helpful things for our state and other states since you were in Congress. And I have to admire anybody who's stuck in the politician game as long as you have and done as much good work as you've done. But you're also aware that you and I have an issue we disagree on because I'm a member of the DFL Environmental Caucus statewide, and we've done some research. You're on record, along with some of the other candidates for governor, approving of a land swap that PolyMet snuck in and bought some land